Welcome to Grow Good, a place to spread joy, beauty, and goodness, to bear good fruit, a place where others can meet or be inspired to meet God. So get cozy, lean in, and listen close. Miracles are at work, and He wants to meet you too. Hello, friends, and happy Tuesday. I'm so excited to bring you one of the first episodes I ever recorded today. I have my dear, dear brother and best friend on the podcast. Neither of us have ever done a podcast before, so it's pretty funny. You can hear that we're pretty nervous at first, and then we loosen up, and it's just a beautiful conversation and exactly what I'm hoping that this podcast can accomplish. You know, we talk about it a lot in the episode, but this is the evidence. It's happening all around us every day. And so I'm just hoping that this can be a place where we can compile these stories and hear from each other about what the Lord is doing in our lives. So without any further ado, enjoy the very first episode I ever recorded, Kenneth Dobbs. Kenny, welcome to the show.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your life and what you're up to right now?
Yes, so my name is Kenneth Dobbs. I am 25 years old. I am Rachel's brother. I am a history teacher at Holy Family Academy. I've written lesson plans that have been published in 4 textbooks now for Sophia Press Institute. I am also getting my own book published through Page Publishing. It's called The Idea of God, and it's all about how religion is necessary to have a stable society. And yeah, I also love sports and the Patriots and working out. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that on a shallow level about myself.
I'm kind of a big deal. Well, I guess let's just get right into it. So when did you first meet or encounter Jesus at a personal level?
It wasn't necessarily at first. I mean, it was, but it wasn't necessarily like an intellectual understanding of Jesus. It was more the notion of God. When you and Kate actually had just lost one of our cats, and I think I was like 5 or 4 years old, and I think it was Nala, and Nala got stuck in a thunderstorm. And I remember you and Kate were just both like really upset and crying, and you really wanted Nala to come back, and Grandma Dobbs was trying to console you guys, and she said, like, don't worry, guys, like, I'm sure she's okay, but you guys like kept crying. So then I said, well, why don't we pray for Nala to come back? Like, God hears our prayers, and He'll hear that. So we all said a quick prayer. We treated our sofa like it was a pew at church, and we knelt on the sofa and had our faces facing towards our backyard, like our sunroom window. And we said a really quick prayer to God. And as we were praying, all of a sudden, Nala came up to the glass door and started scratching on it. What? And we all freaked out, and we were like, Nala! And we let her in. And that was my first experience with prayer and God and it being answered in kind of like a weird way. And I remember the look on Grandma Dobbs's face, because she thought it was really sweet that we were praying, but that nothing would happen. But then all of a sudden, Nala came to the door, and she was shocked. Like, her eyes were very wide, and she didn't really know what to make of what just happened. So that was my first experience with God. But ever since that moment, I kind of had I always sort of experienced a presence around me when I prayed. And I can't really describe it other than when you close your eyes and someone's behind you or someone's around you, you can sort of feel that someone's there. And that's kind of what it's like. And that happened to me when I was young, and it continued to happen to me up until middle school. And that's when I started to have problems with my faith. I sort of tried to keep believing in God and doing Catholic things, but the temptations of the secular world got the best of me, and I sort of became what people call a Cafeteria Catholic. So I would only go on Christmas and Easter. I really wouldn't practice the moral teachings of the faith. I kind of thought they were antiquated. So I kind of thought I was above the church's moral teachings, and that meant I could do whatever I wanted, but still call myself Catholic. And that really isolated me. I didn't really pray every day. Actually, I didn't pray every day. And it wasn't until my sophomore year of high school that started to change the other way, back to being more religious. It was still a long journey to going back to praying to God every day. But my cousin Jake came to a Christmas party, and he had just gotten back from Austria because there's a study abroad program at the college that he and I both went to, or I eventually went to it, but at the time I hadn't gone to it yet. And there's a study abroad program in Austria, and it just changes people's lives. And it very much changed his life because he came back and there was just something different about him. I don't know if you've ever encountered, you most likely have, and people listening to this most likely have, encountered someone who's just fake, like a very fake person who pretends like they're happy all the time and pretends like their life is filled with joy, and they laugh at all these jokes and they just seem super happy, but they're not. And you can tell that they're not actually happy. And they're the type of person that when someone leaves the conversation, if there's three of you talking, when the third person leaves, they immediately start talking about that other person behind their back. They're not happy. They're miserable people, but they'll pretend like they're happy and they put on this appearance of being happy. But Jake wasn't like that. He was actually happy and joyful. And there is a very distinct difference between someone who's fake and shallow happy and someone who actually has joy. And I had never encountered that before. So when I talked to him, I asked him all sorts of questions about everything that had to do except for joy and happiness. So I asked him a ton of really tough questions about the faith, like, why is the church against premarital sex? Why is the church against homosexual marriage? Why is the church against abortion? Why is the church against birth control? All of these questions that are very difficult as a high schooler to reconcile with our society right now. And he answered every single one of them calmly, confidently, and just charitably. He treated me like a good person, even though he could tell that I somewhat disagreed with what the church taught. That didn't bother him. He just helped me see his perspective without necessarily trying to force me to change mine. he was just letting me know, well, here's why the church teaches that. And once he answered all of those and we talked about it and wrestled with those issues, there was kind of a lull in the conversation. And it had been for like 2 hours that we were talking. And there was a lull in the conversation. And so I finally asked him, Jake, why are you so happy? Like, there's something different about you, and I want to know why. And he just told me, I've found Christ. Like, I know Jesus. And that sounds crazy if you don't know who Jesus is or what that even means. So I kept trying to ask him, like, what do you mean you know Christ? Like, what do you mean you know Jesus? What does that actually mean? And he explained to me the reality of the Eucharist, that the little round piece of bread that the priest distributes at Mass, that actually is Jesus. He takes on the appearance of bread and wine, but that's him. And once you understand that, your whole life changes. Once you understand that and you accept it, your whole life changes. And he pointed me towards a few Eucharistic miracles that occurred throughout history of the bread and wine actually literally becoming human flesh, and particularly the flesh of a human heart, a human male 30-year-old heart who had just suffered trauma. That's what the host turned into, literally. In the hands of the priest, it turned into flesh.
Wow.
And I couldn't argue against that. I was just amazed. At first, I was skeptical, but then I did the research, and it turned out that it was true. And independent scientists took it into a lab and studied and confirmed that it was a male human heart around 30 years old who had just experienced severe trauma. And that was Christ on the cross. And he comes to us every Mass in the form of bread and wine, because it would be kind of gross if we ate human flesh literally. So he goes under the appearance of bread and wine, but it's not bread and wine anymore. And he said that that was the source of his joy. He confesses his sins, what he does wrong. He acknowledges that he's a sinner, and then he receives Jesus, and he's filled with authentic joy. And that doesn't mean that he's smiling all the time, or he's like, yeah, he's always happy like that person who's fake. It's more like when he's hit with something that's traumatic or difficult, he's able to overcome it. Mm-hmm. He's able to choose to find the purpose and meaning in that suffering because of the joy that he's found in Jesus. And that's what he explained to me that day. And I eventually went to Franciscan. And even though my first 2 years there, I didn't actually live the Catholic faith, I just read books. And
really?
Yeah, so I was still, I was still in that relationship with the girl from high school. And she was not Catholic. In fact, she didn't even believe in a God. So I was living her lifestyle. I was not conforming her to my lifestyle and what I wanted to do. I was living how she wanted to live. And eventually that led to our relationship ending. My sophomore year of high school, right before I went to Austria, is when her and I broke up. And it was perfect timing, because then I received the same sort of change in my life that Jake received when I had talked to him coming back from Austria. So it was really good timing. And that's when I decided to actually start living out the Catholic faith. I still obviously struggled with it. There's some really difficult teachings as a modern 21st
Right.
century man to follow.
I mean, I think it's safe to say, I mean, something that I've realized is that even if that's the thing is it's very rare. You basically are a saint at that point if you have fully achieved everything there is to know and grow into on earth. I think everyone's always constantly growing, and I've learned too, it's like a daily choice that you have to make. It's not like something that you get and then you just have it. It's like a daily growth, I think, and a daily choice that you have to make. It's not like something you just achieve and it's like an on off switch, which I think is what, when you're on the outside, it can seem like, it's like, oh, you just like are in the faith and now X, Y, and Z all happens, and you just like from then on, you get it. But that's just not, true. It's actively saying yes to Jesus every day. Like what he says, like take up your cross and follow me. It's not going to be a cakewalk, basically.
Yeah. And that doesn't sound fun in the modern world. Everyone runs away from suffering and discomfort, but that's what makes specifically Catholicism so true, is that, guess what? You can't. Eventually, at some point in your life, you're going to suffer. There's going to be something that comes into your life that you have to confront. And by running away from it, you actually make it worse on yourself. Like if you get cancer and you know something's wrong with you and you don't go to the doctors, you try and just cover it up, guess what? You're going to die. Like you have to confront whatever it is you're facing and bear that on yourself and offer up that suffering for a purpose. Like it's been psychologically like proven. And one book is called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he's a guy, he was a Jewish man who didn't really practice his Judaism at first. I don't know if he did after what happened to him, but he actually went to a concentration camp. And before the concentration camp, he was a psychologist. So he treated being in a concentration camp sort of as a field of his study. Like he found purpose and meaning in what he was going through. He said you could tell when someone had given up and they could not find meaning anymore because they would trade in their food for cigarettes. So they would go to a Nazi guard and trade the food that they had for the cigarettes that the Nazi guards had. And the cigarettes, the Nazi guards would give them cigarettes, and then that person would be dead within a few hours.
Wow.
And they had just given up. They said, there's no point, there's no meaning. But everyone who he met along his journey in the concentration camp who continued to keep living had a purpose for what they were going through. And he ended up calling his form of therapy Logos therapy. And as we know, maybe some people don't, but the opening of John's gospel says, in the beginning was the Word. And word in Greek is logos, so that means in the beginning there was purpose, there was meaning. That's what word, we translated it into Latin as verbum, but the original Greek is logos, and it's a much better definition than verbum, because logos means purpose and meaninghood. It doesn't just mean language. And so he named his therapy after what Jesus is, because later in John's gospel it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Wow.
So the Logos became flesh. So Christ is meaning and purpose. And look at what he did on earth. All he did was suffer. Like, he died on a cross in the most miserable way a human being can die. And why did he do that? He gave us a conduit to channel all of the unhappiness and suffering that we experience in the world due to sin. That's what the cross was. Like, he united every person's suffering to himself, and he redeemed it.
Right.
If you choose to accept him every day, to your point, then you can justify all of the suffering that you experience in your whole life. You can match it and unite it with Christ and find meaning and purpose in that suffering. And it's really just beautiful to ponder and contemplate, because a Jewish man who wasn't religious discovered this.
Right.
Like, he discovered it objectively in the world, that human beings, it's human nature to discover purpose and meaning. Right. And that helps you overcome suffering.
Yeah. And the other thing, I've thought is I believe, right, at one point in every human's life, a human asks, why am I here? Like that's a pretty normal thing, I think, for you to ask at some point in your life, whether it's like when you're really young and you realize it, or whether it's when you're really old and you realize it. But at some point, it's probably going to cross your mind, like, what is it that we're doing here? And I don't think that that's a mistake. I think that we're made to ponder that question, because that's what leads us to God. And so I think that that's why it is, one of the inspirations for this podcast, because, right, I'm still growing. As I've learned, the more people I talk to, I think everybody is still growing. You're never, unless you're God, you're never going to stop growing, because, like, that's kind of the point out of life, is to grow closer to God. And that all begins by pondering the question, like, why am I here? Or what is the point of what I'm doing? What is the point of my suffering, for example?
Right.
Like, any form of that question is going to lead you to answers. And if you seek answers, seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened.
Yeah.
You'll find the answers, because they do exist. It's not that they don't exist. It's just that, right, it takes somebody to ponder it and to find the answers. But so, wow, that was a really great answer that led us on to a couple different things.
Yeah.
But was there kind of a point in what you're saying? I think that was beautifully described, how you basically learned through a witness that you saw in your life, and you were able to, that. And then again, this is also an inspiration for creating this podcast, because that's exactly how it happened for me. And I feel like that's how it happens for a lot of people, is from a witness that is living their faith. It's attractive to other humans. Like, they want to know, like, what is going on, because something is different in them, like something's going on. Or just like, even listening, even like you were saying, you started just reading a bunch of books before you were actively living it out. And I had a very similar experience. I was just reading or listening to a ton of audiobooks, listening to a ton of podcasts, Catholic podcasts, just hearing witnesses of the faith. And basically that was changing my heart. And eventually it got, it aligned with my own desires to want to do what they are doing, like whether it was them listening to the Lord in their life, or, telling a story about how they've leaned on the Lord in the past. Eventually it sounded just so attractive and cool to me that I was like, okay, I want to do this. And that's when I started actively, trying to live this out every day, by praying every day, spending time with God every day, spending time in the Word, and so I think that is so strong when you have a witness in your life. But so then at what point, did you have a point in prayer, like, or did you start praying when you kind of heard a response back from God?
Yeah. So I always related to St. Peter, because in the Gospels, St. Peter is very...
You remind me so much of Peter.
Yeah, because
he would totally like jump into the water like after,
right.
You know what I mean?
That's who I am. Like,
yeah,
I'm a very impulsive person, and I'm either all in or I'm not at all. Like, and that's something that I need to get better at, because eventually most people don't read Acts of the Apostles, but in Acts of the Apostles, Peter figured himself out, and he is no longer impulsive and kind of like one extreme to the next. He has found balance, like he's found order, and he's able to walk up to a guy laying on a mat who's paralyzed, and he's able to heal him just by saying, in the name of Jesus, walk. Like, he has that much confidence.
That's so
and
cool.
He's not crazy and like jumping out of boats. He's just very calm and sure of himself and what he believes in. But at the time, and I still do relate, I'm more like St. Peter in the Gospel than I am Acts of the Apostles. Definitely. Not even close to Acts of the Apostles. But so what he would do is he would go from one extreme to the next, and he would have times, like literally to exemplify that, when he became Pope, Jesus, or the way that he became Pope is Jesus asked, "Who do people say that I am?" And all of the disciples responded with different results. Like, oh, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah, some say you're, I don't know, Moses. And then he asks, "Who do you think that I am?" And everyone's silent, but Peter gets up and says, "You are the Christ. Like, you're the Son of God. You are God."
Yeah.
And then Jesus says, like, "Amen. Like, you did not come up with that, but my Father gave you this knowledge." And he says, "You are Peter." And if you translate Peter in Greek, or even Hebrew, I think, or Aramaic, I should say, if you translate that name, because back then, every name had a meaning. It wasn't just random. And Jesus gave Simon the name Peter. So he deliberately changed Simon's name to Peter. Peter translates to rock. So he says, "You are Peter. So you are a rock. And upon this rock, I will build my church." So Peter did something amazing and really good. And he encountered God and Jesus, or Jesus as God, and he became Pope. Immediately after that.
Yeah, I love this. This is so funny. This is so funny, Kenny, because I literally have just read this, and then I've heard it in a couple different things that I've been listening to. Like, it keeps coming up.
Yeah.
Just interesting that you're bringing this up now. I'm like, what? I don't know. We keep coming back to this. He's trying to say something. I just don't. That's kind of the fun of it, is when you start picking up on things like that, I know that he's trying to communicate something. I just need to understand what it is. I don't understand quite yet, but yeah. And then I think that's so cool. Exactly what you're about to say, but within literally the same sentence almost.
Right.
Yeah,
Then
keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. Then Jesus says what we were talking about earlier. I'm going to suffer and die. I'm going to die on a cross, but in 3 days I'll come back redeemed. And Peter says to him, he rebukes Jesus and says, "What are you talking about, Jesus? Like, no, you're not going to suffer. No one wants to suffer. Like, stop." And then Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." So he calls Peter Satan
right after he him the rock of his church, which I think is so interesting, because, and maybe this is what he's trying to say to me. It's not like you all of a sudden are, and then all of a sudden you're not the other.
Yes.
So it's a constant.
It's a daily choice that you have to make.
Yeah, it's a daily, moment by moment.
Not even daily. Yeah, it's every single second you have to choose.
And the fact that somebody that amazing, Peter, who like he literally entrusts the church to,
Right.
in the same sentence, basically, he calls him Satan. It's like, whoa, but because I just think that's so far from where our world is now. And I think that's why it strikes me so much. It's like people are just so black and white all the time. Like it's like you're either this or you're that. And I just think it's so cool how like in that scene, in that verse chapter, you can tell that within one person, within moments, you can be one way and then the other. Like it's not, I just think too, I mean, it's a lot of different layers, but I do think too, like we're so quick in this world now to just stick a label on something because we want to categorize a person, a place, a animal, as practice, as, you know, it's either A or B. And sometimes, yeah, for sure it is. But other times, you know, as a human being, you're a living soul. And it's kind of back to our greater theme of what we're saying is that you're constantly growing and learning and being shaped. And it also shows how God is so merciful and forgiving. Like the person that he is entrusting his church to, he's then calling Satan or saying Satan. But I thought that's so cool too, because it's not like he's calling Peter Satan or the person itself Satan. He's calling his act Satan. That's Satan acting in him. Because
you're giving in to lower passions.
And yourself, not what my will. I think he says that. Like something about his will, not yours. But anyway, you were getting to how Peter maybe somehow led you to that personal response.
Yeah. So I always related to St. Peter, and in confirmation in high school, I made him my confirmation saint. And the story that resonated with me the most out of St. Peter was when Jesus is walking on the water and everyone thinks it's a ghost at first or like a demon or some sort of evil spirit. And then I think it's St. John recognizes it's the Lord. And then Peter gets out of the boat, or no, Jesus calls Peter out of the boat and he walks on water towards Jesus, and he had the faith to do it. But then because of the storm that's going on around them and the water like raising, he panics and he falls into the water, and Jesus has to pick him up out of the water. And he says, "Oh, Peter, like, why did you doubt? Like you have the faith, you fell in, I'm going to get you back out, but don't doubt me. Like, trust that I can help you and trust that I can make you do amazing things if you would just work with me." And for me, I just had gotten broken up with by the girl who was my high school girlfriend, and I had gone to a youth conference at Steubenville, and basically the whole event went silent, and they turned the lights off and they put a spotlight on the host, and they said, "Everyone just sit in silent prayer." And so we sat and we were staring at the Eucharist. And at this point, I didn't really fully get. I've heard so many people say it and I wanted to believe it, but I didn't really fully actually commit to the idea of Jesus being in the Eucharist. But in that moment, I was broken and I was emptied out, or I was just very empty of everything. And I said, like, "God, if you could give me just one word, like you had Peter walk on the water. Can you give me one word from you that you exist?" And I just sat and waited. and waited. And then all of a sudden, the speaker gets up and says, I don't know why I'm called to do this, but I need to read this verse right now. And he read the verse of Peter in the boat and Jesus calling him out and Peter falling through the water. And then he read the words of Jesus, oh, Peter, why did you doubt? And right after he read that already hit me because I related so much to St. Peter and I related so much to that verse.
And
that guy,
saint.
He's my confirmation saint. And that guy just randomly read that verse out of nowhere. But then on top of that,
it's about doubt.
Yeah. And then on top of that, right after he read that verse from Jesus, he stopped reading and into my head, the word faith was spoken, not by me. Like you can tell when you originate a thought because it happens all the time.
Right.
But this wasn't like that. Like it entered my head and I wasn't the one who put it there. And it was a very surreal experience because it wasn't an audible voice. It just like came into me and it was the word faith. And then I just like, broke down because I was just so shocked and amazed at like the fact that he actually answered that prayer. It would have been enough for me for him to just have that verse read by that guy out of complete coincidence. That guy read that verse of all verses in that moment. But then on top of that, he did put a word in my head and it was faith. And it was ever since that moment that I've been wrestling with God, like wanting, I am Saint Peter, like in the sense that before he was a saint, like, because he abandoned Jesus at the cross. He denied him 3 times. But then Jesus, after he resurrects, says to Peter 3 times, do you love me? So even though Peter denied him 3 times, Jesus gave him another chance and asked him 3 times, do you love me? So we're able to be redeemed for our sins. And that's where I'm at in my life right now. Like I am not the Peter that can heal a cripple. I'm the Peter that constantly denies him when I'm in tough situations. But the good news is that you can be redeemed by choosing to confess your sins and admitting when you screw up. And Jesus will forgive you as long as you're sincere in your heart that you're actually sorry. And he'll embrace you and he'll ask you, why did you doubt? Like, just have faith. Trust me. And so that was like my moment.
And that's amazing. That is exactly what I am hoping to get out of these episodes. Like, because everybody that is in the faith, that's an incredible story. Everybody that's in the faith has these. I honestly believe that they're miracles. I mean, it's like, it's happening all the time. Like last week, the reading was St. John the Baptist from prison who wrote and asked, are you the one that we're waiting for, or should we look for another? And Jesus responds like, tell John like what you see and hear, like all around you. Like the blind are able to see, the deaf are able to hear. The sick are being healed.
Yeah.
Like, go and tell him what you've seen. And that was just so clear to me that it was like, look around, like God is at work. I mean, just look around. You know what I mean? Like they're talking to Jesus. They have a living relationship with a living God. And
yeah,
I believe that as fact, but like, and I feel like those kinds of stories are like evidence, it's just like with physical evidence that you build up for a case, like, I don't know. I guess I've just been looking at it like that. Like this is evidence that this is happening to people all over the world. And it's been happening for centuries. So it's just really cool to hear those kinds of stories. Like, that's what gets me excited and makes me feel alive.
Right.
In the faith. Like, that's what makes you want to go out and have an experience like that. Like it makes you want to have a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah. And I will caution this with God. Here's what I think happens. And this has come from reading saints like Saint Teresa of Avila and Saint John of the Cross. The spiritual life and prayer life is sort of like when you first get married to someone, there's that cliche of the honeymoon phase. So the first experience and encounter of marriage is like amazing. So God is a romantic, and he will swan song you. Like he when you turn to him sincerely in your heart, I like to think of in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, when George Bailey is at the bar and he finally breaks down and prays. Granted, he gets punched in the face before the prayer gets answered, but God hears those kind of prayers and he will do something incredible. It might not be an angel coming to you to help you, but it will be something incredible. But my tale of caution is God will then remove that romantic feeling that you have. And it might last a year that you have a crazy romantic, like, oh my gosh, everything's so great. I love God. But then all of a sudden, boom, like he'll seemingly remove his presence from your life. And you'll be like, wait a sec, was I just bamboozled? Like, did I make all of that up? Did anything crazy actually happen? Am I just crazy? Like, what's going on? And so many saints have written about this. And that's when God is calling you to encounter him in a deeper way, in a more mature way. It's like you need to up
your level of spiritual. Yeah.
Yeah. And people can relate that to even something as crude as drugs. When you first take, I don't know, marijuana or alcohol, it doesn't take as much to get you drunk or high.
Right.
Like you can have a little bit and you'll be like loopy. But then after a while, you develop a tolerance for it and you need more and more and more. And that actually empties you out. So that's why it's a bad analogy, because the more and more alcohol you drink and the more marijuana you smoke, it empties you. Like it makes you less of a human being. But with God, it makes you more of a human being, and it actually takes effort to get more of him. You have to do things, to your point, you have to deny worldly pleasures in order to get spiritual goods. So, for instance, one thing that I do now, which is very difficult, but I do a 3 a.m. holy hour on Mondays, and I just sit with Jesus to start my week at 3 a.m. That's not very fun. Like, that's not something that like normal people do, but that's what it takes for me to be able to continue my relationship with Jesus. Is I can't just expect shallow level effort on my part and then have God do some sort of miracle all the time. No, like,
it's so true. He does. He leads you deeper and deeper. And it's crazy. Like, and that's the thing is, like, day to day, sometimes you feel like you're not progressing, but then you look back. I mean, like, now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's literally transformed my life in so many ways, but day to day, I wouldn't have said that.
Right.
But then now, you start doing things that make zero sense to somebody that would have no idea what you're talking about. But like, it makes sense to you because you can feel that difference that it makes.
Right. And so, yeah. And it's just like any human relationship where the shallow level emotionalism will dissipate. And then all of a sudden you have to make the intellectual decision. Do I love this person or not? And it's the same thing.
And you have to
God.
sacrifice, yes. I feel like he'll ask you to sacrifice in a deeper way.
Right.
Something like time or whatever it might be at that stage, for him. And I think I honestly, I feel like that's the purpose of life I think according to the Catholic faith, it's to become a saint, because it's to basically continue to progress, to be closer and closer to the Lord. Because that's what he's calling you to throughout the course of your life. That's an amazing story, though, that first moment that really converted your heart. Because I think everybody has that first. And now I know, recently learned, that the first act of the grace of the Holy Spirit is turning your heart. That first feeling of curiosity, like that first thing you got when you met Jake, was the Holy Spirit working in your heart. Right. But then everybody has this like deeper personal conversion of their own heart. Yes. Where they hear him respond, or they believe it for themselves. They say yes to God themselves. And that's what you just described for us, which was amazing. So since then, what have some of your biggest challenges been for you personally in cultivating this relationship? I know we've kind of talked generally about the challenges that everybody has, but from there on, what were some of the bigger challenges and hurdles you had to face?
To be frank, once you accept God and his natural, moral, objective order in creation that you can discover with your intellect, like you can discover what's right and what's wrong, you have to give up things that are very pleasurable and, very self-gratifying. Like, for instance, it's not rational to drink in excess. Just watch a group of people at a party that drink to excess and they throw up. Like, that's not very rational behavior. Like, that's not human behavior. Like, that's kind of acting like an animal, or, it's just giving into your lower passions.
Right.
And you have to sacrifice that. And sure, people screw up every now and then, but I had to give that up. Like, that's something that I don't do routinely at all anymore. And I strive, even when I do drink, to not let that happen. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult, and you get it just gets really difficult sometimes. You feel like you're crazy because everyone else around you might be living a certain way and telling you to do a certain thing. And sometimes you will mess up, and sometimes you will give in. But at the end of the day, you know that you're right. Like, you know that the way that you've decided to live and commit yourself to living is the correct way. You just have to keep choosing it, and you just have to keep fighting those desires. And those temptations never really go away, but they do get solved by grace. And that's been another struggle of mine, is I've noticed how casually people treat things like the sacraments and Mass. So, for instance, I teach students. I've seen students receive Jesus when they have gum in their mouth. Mm. That is so disrespectful. And that is, would you walk up to Jesus on the cross and put gum in his hair? On top of everything else that he's going through, would you put gum in his hair or just spit gum on him? Like, no. Like, have some decency, have some respect. And I know that these students...
Right, how far their heart is from Jesus, Like, because, I was there. Like, people, I'm sure you were there in high school. Like, before you had this active relationship, you don't really understand what you're doing. You don't really understand what it is that you're walking into. I also, struggled a lot with and still do sometimes. But I think, thank God, by the grace of God, literally, it's been changed. But I used to struggle, with the idea of having to go to mass weekly, but he totally transformed my heart about that. It was like, why do you, I used to think before I had this relationship, like, why do you want this chore? It's like this task that we have to do, every week. Like, seriously? Like, and now it's like, and now I've realized, like, it's literally, when you have a relationship with him, it's literally, you want to go. Like, honestly, you want to go because you want to spend time with your friend.
Yeah, and so that's been one of my difficulties, is seeing people that live the lifestyle that I used to live, trying not to feel prideful about myself where I'm at now, and also not trying to be overly judgmental towards that person, because I was once that exact same way. But I also recognize that they ought not to do that. The person who did that the best was Jesus.
And to read it, I mean, honestly, to read it every single day is another, it's a different story, because you're listening to his words and hearing how he acts, reading how he acts every day. And so then it comes to mind when you're in a situation like that, because, right, it's not our job to judge, that's God's job. That's really helpful, Kenny. I think that's really helpful that you named all of those challenges. I think everybody is dealing with at least one of those. So it's super relatable. I love that you gave some examples of how you were able to overcome a few of them too. That's great. So what have been, I guess, on that note, we've talked a lot about challenges and how hard it can be to kind of take up your cross and to follow Jesus every day. It's not an easy thing to do. But what have been some of your greatest joys along the journey? Like, what, I guess, makes you keep doing what you're doing every day?
Well, a lot of it is just, well, first and foremost, there's no other option. Like, not in a bad way, but like intellectually, emotionally, morally, there is no other option. If you actually study philosophy and theology, there's really two options. It's either there is a transcendent order which provides truth, beauty, and goodness objectively, or there's not. Like, there's nothing. There's no truth, there's no goodness, there's no beauty. Everything else between those two options just aren't true. It's just fluff. Like, you're pursuing pleasure, or you're pursuing all these other things that don't actually have any meaning behind them unless they're conformed to God, like an actual objective truth, beauty, and goodness. So first and foremost, there is no other option. That's why, and I understand that. And I know the consequences of rejecting God once you've discovered him. And I know what it does to people when they do that. The joys that I get, though, are from acting on what I know to be true. And even when I'm in situations that are difficult, when I do the right thing, God sheds his grace on you, even in the toughest of situations, and he blesses you abundantly. So the Psalms talk about how the man who acts according to God's law, like, he has what little he does have is like an oasis or like a paradise. And I always think of the play, The Christmas Carol. Scrooge has everything he could ever want, but he's miserable. But the Cratchits, they have next to nothing, and they are the most joyful people on earth. They just love what they have because they understand that it's come from God. God exists, he's real, and he cares about you and he loves you. And no matter what you're going through, he's on your side. And that just changes your life. It changes everything. So, I mean, the greatest joys I have in my life, are first and foremost my fiance, Kara, who I met at Franciscan, and our relationship and everything that makes us who we are is grounded on the faith. So I've gotten so much joy from that, and there's been so much spiritual fruit in my life with my relationship with God from conforming to the church's teaching. My family brings so much joy to my life because they've helped me experience God in both the ways in which what happens when you abandon God and the ways in which when you accept him fully. And that has brought so much joy, just seeing the reality of the gospel played out at a local level in my own life, in my own family. And just seeing God's graces shed on my family and spread onto my family, that is amazing as well, because you can offer up your sacrifices with all the difficulties that we talked about. You can offer all of those up at Mass or when you pray a rosary, and God will redistribute. People talk about redistributing things all the time, but God will redistribute that suffering or that difficulty and turn it into grace. Like he will overwhelm whatever the situation is with his grace, and it will be solved. Like it will go according to his will. All you have to do is just ask him or his mother, and it will be done. So that has brought me so much joy, is seeing that played out on my family by my own conversion and offering up sufferings and inconveniences, and then seeing the fruits of those prayers come to fruition. And I also have experienced joy just in my vocation as a teacher. No matter what you do, God has put you on the earth to do that. And if you do it to the best of your ability and you accept that, then you will find joy in whatever it is that you're doing, because you know that it is divinely been inspired for you to do it. So Saint Therese of Lisieux said, she called herself the little flower, because we can't all be a rose. We can't all be the Immaculate Virgin Mary. We are called to be who we are. And that might be a smaller impact on the world than even Saint Therese of Lisieux. But if you're who you are supposed to be, and you'll have an incredible impact on the world, even in the small ripple effect that you have, it will change the world for good in an amazing way. So all of those things are the joys that I have in life.
I mean, that was amazing. Yeah. I think that that's so practical too. Like just like explaining how you live it out, because
Right.
that's something too that, I mean, at least where I'm at now, like, I feel like I'm at this place where I'm struggling to figure out how to take what I've been learning and experiencing and witnessing on my own and in what I've been listening to and reading, and then actually living it out into my daily life. So I think that's really cool that you, when asked that, that's what came up. It's just a neat thing, because I think, the answer will be different for everyone, but I think that that's really helpful just to see how, where you began and then where you are now. It's amazing. And that's kind of goes into the next question. What is God doing in your life right now? I mean, do you have any recent or practical things that have happened to you lately that kind of reiterate kind of your relationship with God, whether that's just personally or through something you've seen in your life from prayer? Do you have just one example of something recently that happened?
Yeah, so I have that 3 a.m. holy hour, and I offer it up in the spirit of Saint Therese of Lisieux. So there's this crazy story about Saint Therese of Lisieux where she would pray every day, and she wouldn't ask God a laundry list of things that she needed. What she would do is she would get on her knees, she'd make the sign of the cross, and then she'd say, God, I trust that you will send your graces to where they are most needed in my life, in the life of my loved ones, in the world, and in the church. Amen. And then she would continue her prayer, whether it be the rosary or whatever it was that she was going to pray that day. But she wouldn't ask for specific intentions. She would just trust in God radically that he would send the grace where it's most needed. And one day she was praying in her convent, and a cardinal came to visit the convent. And the cardinal asked to see all of the sisters that were at the convent. And he eventually saw Saint Therese. And he pointed at her and said, you have been praying for me. And Saint Therese was like, I don't even know who you are. Like, kind of like the Thanos thing. And he was like, it was because of you that I became a cardinal. The night before I received like the blessing to become a cardinal, you appeared in my dream, and God said, go to this convent and thank this sister, because he saw an image of her. And Therese was blown away by that, because Therese had just said, send your graces to where they're most needed in the world. And it was through her that prayer, that man's life was radically changed just through that prayer that she was doing. So for me, I do that for my holy hour on Mondays. And one day in particular, I just really focused on the words like in the world, like around me, immediately, right now, people that need your prayers. 2 weeks later, I walk into the Adoration Chapel on Monday, it's 3 a.m., and a man is sitting in the Adoration Chapel, other than the person who, because every hour someone's there. So there's the guy who's normally there ahead of me and another man. So we have like a little cloth that we have to designate that you're the person that's staying there for that hour. So I took the cloth, I genuflected, I sat down in my chair, and somehow or another, the man started up a conversation with me. And he told me that around 2 weeks ago, he was walking home from work and he found a woman who had been sexually abused right outside of the church, the chapel. Wow. And she desperately needed help. And he just so happened, he didn't know what led him down that road, but something told him to take a turn that he doesn't normally take. And so he did. He acted on it, and he followed that voice that told him, go down that road. And he found that girl, and he got her help, and he took her to Catholic Medical Center. And he said it was around 3 a.m. 2 weeks ago that I did this. And
oh my gosh.
I'm just taking the time right now to thank God that we got that girl help. And then at the end of that hour, I didn't really think anything of it at first. I was like, oh, that's a crazy story. That's great that guy did that. And that girl got the help that she needed. But then as I was heading back up to my apartment, my rosary kind of like jingled in my pocket a little bit. And then I like thought about it, because like it moved when I wasn't really like moving it. You know what I mean? Like it kind of just all of a sudden jutted out.
Yeah.
And then I thought to myself, like, wait a second. I was praying at 3 a.m. 2 weeks ago. When you radically devote your trust to God, like Saint Therese did, and if you imitate that, then God will radically answer your prayers. And there's a few other things that are too personal to discuss on a podcast, but when you ask God or tell him, I trust you, like, I know that you're watching over me, send your graces to where they're needed. He will. Like, and he will prepare you for things that are just larger than you thought you could ever handle. And you're able to handle them both in good ways and in bad ways. So I would just recommend for everyone who listens to this to practice that prayer and try it. Like,
that's such a good prayer.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, yeah, the more I've been getting, into it, I've kind of like lost that because, growing up, I would always pray and I would just, share because we grew up Catholic. I don't even know if we said that, but, but we grew up like, going to church, went through CCD, all that. But right, I would always pray, like I pray for this person, I pray for that person, like very much like that. And I think that's where a lot of people are. I think that's how a lot of people pray. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I do think, right, when you actually start to build this real personal relationship with God, your prayer like changes. And I just haven't really felt the need or the want even to pray that way anymore. It's more like, because really, right, if you believe that God knows all and knows you and knows your heart, like it's good to share your heart with him, but he does already know it. So it's like kind of like being like, I love that prayer because it's like, that's kind of basically what I've been wanting to say lately. It's almost like, you say what's on your heart, but then it's like, I've been saying, but, your will is what's best. So like, if that's not your will, then, do your will because what's better.
Right.
I can't see what's better, but this is what it looks like to me. But
right.
but please do what you see and what is best. So I love that prayer because it's just such a simple way of saying exactly what I've been kind of struggling to say myself. So I love that, just kind of like, so send your graces where they're needed most. I mean, the desires of my heart. You already know where I'm struggling. You know what I want for people, but it's not my wants. I want what you want because what is best for this world, beyond what I can see or say. So,
right.
Yeah, I love that. That's powerful. That's really cool. I did not realize that Saint Therese did that. I mean, yeah, there's more with Saint Therese in our family. I feel like too, that she just definitely, I feel like has a hand on our family too, and is working in a lot of ways, which is really neat because I've had stories with Saint Therese. She's really stuck out to me too. And I know, our sister Kate has, and our mom has, and so I definitely feel like there's a trend there with her. She's so inspirational. It's amazing.
Well, saints pick people to pray for on earth that they particularly intercede for. Like, I mean, every saint prays for you in heaven, but I feel like there's certain ones that just pray for you a little bit extra or something like that.
Or reach out to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So another example that I have, you were talking about practicality. There are so many saints for practical things in your life that can just make you a better person. Like, I still struggle, but I've gotten so much better with losing things, misplacing things, being disorganized. And so I've developed, because I'm naturally that way, there's a saint of lost items and lost things, and you can pray to him and he will answer those prayers. His name is Saint Anthony. And all the time now, I'll lose something and I'll just pray like, Saint Anthony, can you please help me find X, Y, or Z, whatever it might be? And then all of a sudden, in my head, I will know where that object is. I'll be like, oh, wow. And then I'll find it. And I'll be like, thank you, Saint Anthony. So that's like a really practical thing that you can do. So find something that you personally struggle with, and then find the patron saint of that particular thing, and then ask that saint to pray for you, because that's something that they are specifically dedicated towards answering, or having God answer through their intercession.
Right.
And
that's so
really
interesting.
cool.
It's really cool. All right. So the last question that I'm hoping I can ask all of our guests on this podcast is, can you share with us a verse that is speaking to you recently in your life, or has spoken to you? You know, it could be something from this whole conversion story that you just shared, or reversion story that you just shared. But if you have one recently, that you're speaking to, or one that's important to you overall.
Yeah, so the one that has come into my life recently that actually relates really well to this podcast, which is funny, is Romans 12, verse 2. So that's St. Paul's epistle to the Romans, 12:2. And he says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect, the will of God." So he basically states what we've been saying throughout this whole podcast is, it's not your will and it's not the world's will. It's what God wills. And you need to conform yourself to that will and desire it. You need to unite your will with God's will. And that's how you reach heaven. That's what heaven is when you desire the same thing that God desires. And that involves suffering and it involves sacrifice, but it's worth it. Like, because the alternative is you just suffer meaninglessly. And no one wants that. So you might as well accept it, conform to the will of God and not what the world wants, and make good things happen by conforming your mind to what is good and acceptable and perfect. So that is my verse.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, my brother, Kenny. It is such a gift to have you as my brother and my life companion. You've taught me so much, and I feel like you just continue to teach me more. So thank you for being my dummy guest on my first episode. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and thanks for being the best brother ever.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me as your dummy guest. And I love you.
I love you too.
And I'm very glad to have you as a sister. I'd say you're the best sister in the world, but I also have Kate. So
we make up two halves of the best. All right. Thanks, Kenny.
No problem. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for growing some good with us today. Visit us at togrowgood.com/podcast to find links to everything we mentioned in our conversation. Find us on Instagram at togrowgood. See you next week.